Hi there, Glocal citizens. Welcome back to the podcast that inspires a borderless mindset around manifesting a new world. I am your host, Florence Adu, coming to you from Accra. I'm back on the continent and I'm feeling the love and the sun and the dust. And I think you can hear it in my voice. I have a little bit of a cold, and it is just a cold. But yeah, so I'm just happy to be back, and I'm back in the groove. I spent the weekend, or been spending the weekend at a writers festival called Peja here in Accra, which is kind of a Pan-African writers festival, which is very lovely. And so look forward to sharing a lot of the new writers that I've met there in future episodes. So stay tuned for that. And staying on the Pan-African theme, my guest this week is a longtime friend who is now an expat living on the continent. She is an experienced business-minded physician with expertise in pediatric medicine, preventative medicine, and public health. She is passionate about developing and implementing clinical programs that merge technology and healthcare delivery systems to improve health outcomes. In her last role as the medical director of value-based care at New York's Northwell Health, she established an innovative care model utilizing healthcare analytics, payer data, and strategic clinical partnerships to proactively assess and identify vulnerable populations needing medical attention. A trip to Tanzania in 2018 changed the course of her life. It was during that trip that she decided to move to East Africa and develop digital health programs, expanding access to quality health care. In February 2020, she resigned from Northwell to pursue her dream of democratizing health for all by building an effective, affordable digital health platform that can be used to improve healthcare delivery across a variety of healthcare settings. Dr. Michelle Donald, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you and your global citizen audience, just all about this new phase of my life. It's amazing.
Yay, I'm so excited. So let's get started. First question is always, where are you from? Where are you local? And what is your craft?
So I am from Long Island, New York in the US. I currently am in Nairobi, Kenya, which has been amazing. I kind of bumped around to get here. I went through Tanzania, was headed to Uganda, and then just ended up in Nairobi, and they've welcomed me with open arms. So my craft, interestingly enough, is medicine. Like the introduction said, I'm a pediatrician, preventive medicine doc, and primarily have built my career in digital health.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so now I'm kind of working on two things here in Nairobi. One is a mental health app called Ungrind. It's a startup, which, is kind of slow going. We're building it from the ground up just to really provide mental health services. And then the other exciting thing that I'm doing is something called the Ungrind. And Ungrind is basically a social movement to reject grind culture, prioritize rest, recharging, receiving, and just living a life, that you love. Because I actually made the choice to leave my job and leave my role and in the pursuit of just happiness and joy. So that's what I'm doing here now.
Nice. So let me ask, what exactly is digital health? How would you define it and describe it?
Yeah, so digital health, it's kind of a wide range of things, but traditionally it is providing healthcare utilizing technology. So that's like the broad umbrella. Many people are really familiar with telemedicine now because of COVID. People have been accessing care. So that's the easiest example of digital health. But digital health encompasses using analytics on electronic medical records to really get a picture of the patient and then utilize that data to go and help the patient or the entire population. So really digitizing medical records and medical information to be used to improve health outcomes.
So now being in a totally different context, because obviously from the US, you have, everything state of the art. You have access to a lot of different tools and resources to be able to work in the digital space. How are you finding the infrastructure for that in East Africa?
Yeah, just like in the US, there are two standards of healthcare. So a lot of the private hospitals and private physician offices have electronic medical records. The public sector has almost nothing. But even in the private sector, there's no, I would liken it to about 10 years ago in the US, where most things are on paper. Some places have electronic, whether it's, electronic monitoring for blood pressure that really doesn't go anywhere, or all out digital health records. And the private sector has a lot more digitization and are a lot more open to digitizing records. The public sector, I think there's a lot of struggle around how to digitize the public sector and the appetite for digitizing the public sector. Because, for one thing, it's a huge economic investment.
Mm-hmm.
Just putting electronic medical records, into the offices, sure, that's nice, but you really get the benefit when you can link other offices together. So as people move around, they're not really
Right.
linking their records. And then there's also this thing of digitization of records really hinders fraud and corruption. And, a lot of people are still making money off of, multiple bills for the same things, or
Mm.
digitization, just like in the US, it really had to get a lot of the insurance and pharmacy and redundancy in order, before putting those records. You have to do the same thing here. And there are a lot of people that are benefiting from the chaos. Once you clean the chaos up, then the service that you provided is the service that's in the record, and that's the service that you're going to be paid for, even though the penetrance of insurance isn't even really that big here in East Africa. Like, there is a national health service, which is the public service, but most people don't have private insurance. In the US, private insurance also pushed the digitization of records and helped to fund it. The government really saw value in the digitization of records. So it's really going to take the private and public sectors of governments to really build policy around it and, make it a priority. And there's so many other things to kind of worry about that
Mm-hmm.
the infrastructure around getting digital records up and running just hasn't been prioritized yet. So that was interesting coming here, because my first thought when I left was like, oh, I'll just kind of recreate what I did in the US, because really helping just helping to identify a population, getting really crisp, clear outreach efforts going to populations is what will change health outcomes. So I was like, I can basically just set the same thing up here. Now being here and really seeing the challenges to the infrastructure, that's where I kind of pivoted and started working on the startup, because you're building your own thing and people basically will come to you.
So that's really interesting. So tell us a little bit more about what you worked on, and just generally, so that we kind of understand what the vision is or was that could be potentially transferred in your former role.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was part of a startup within a large corporate hospital called Northwell Health. And our startup was in response to Obamacare really needing
Mm.
to establish prevention, wellness, and crisp, tight management of chronic care illnesses, so that it really prevented people from being hospitalized or rehospitalized. So what we did was, all of our physician offices had electronic medical records. All of the hospitals had electronic medical records. The laboratories fed into the electronic medical records. But before I really started in my role, which was the medical director of value-based care, nobody was really looking at that information and getting a clear picture of the patients and the problems. So seeing how many women that were eligible for mammograms were actually getting them. Children that needed immunizations, were they missing them? Were they actually coming into the practices for sick visits and still never getting set up for their routine well child visits or their immunizations? So really setting up a program that linked the scheduling system, the practices, the missing services information that actually came in through the insurance companies, reaching out to the practices and saying, these patients are going to be in your practice on this day, make sure they get their service. If we saw that there were patients that needed certain services and they had no appointments within the next 6 months, we had a call center that was functioning as an inpatient call center, and where people would call and say, I want to get an appointment for X. We actually turned that call center around with the outreach list of patients who are not getting services to call those patients and proactively bring them in and say, hey, according to our records, according to the insurance that you have not gotten your colonoscopy, or you have not your hemoglobin A1C, which is an indicator of how well a patient is managing their diabetes, is out of range. So we want you to come in and maybe link you with a care manager or link you with a dietitian. So really kind of making that umbrella services here available, because there are already community health workers working throughout Africa and doing a great job. But if they were armed with the information of these are the patients that we really need to target for, whether it's TB, whether it's HIV medications, or now a large subset of people are, not burdened with TB, not burdened with malaria, not burdened with HIV, but are starting to experience the diseases of wealth, which is obesity, diabetes, which is hypertension. So really getting this young, healthy population before it really spirals down to what we see in the US. Because now that you're seeing, these diseases of wealth come in, we know what that looks like, and we know what happens, and we know the sequelae of, eating at KFC and all these things that just didn't used to exist that are now here. People are now, really living kind of robust, long lives where they're working so hard and taking their kids everywhere that they're getting these quick meals, And so really looking at that and seeing how we can prevent the sequelae of wealth.
Very interesting. So, I mean, that seems like a really dynamic program. So, in the time that you were there, how did you measure your impact, and how were you able to see, as a startup, moving through that project, what were your big challenges and what were your successes?
Yeah, when I first got there, basically we were utilizing insurance companies, the national guidelines that insurance companies had used to measure quality, right? But each individual insurance company was saying, I want you to measure this, I want you to measure that, I want you to measure. So what we did is we decided to utilize the HEDIS criteria for all of our programs. And HEDIS, I'm just going to actually look it up because I say it all the time and I don't remember what it is. But HEDIS is the Healthcare Effectiveness Data and Information Set. So those are national guidelines, right? So the first thing that I did in my role was renegotiate all of our contracts so that all the contracts had the same parameters, right? So hemoglobin A1C had to be this, mammograms had to be done at a certain age and this many years. All the immunizations had to be, so everything was standardized across the board. So once we got standards across the board, we would set them with our physician practices, set them with the laboratories, and really set up indicators of when a patient needed to be called, set up, what labs needed to be done at each visit, when a patient was going to be scheduled for a colonoscopy, all based on these national criteria. And then based on that, because Medicaid and Medicare has very standardized quality metrics, and a lot of the Medicaid, Medicare programs incentivize you hitting these certain targets, they're called star ratings. We were able to measure based on our star rating. So we watched our star ratings, increase, but also other parameters of like we also set our own parameters of how many new patients that were not, previously getting care are now into our practices. So really just again utilizing the data and setting up parameters around the data to say something was successful.
Very interesting. So now you find yourself in East Africa, and you had an idea of doing that. And as you mentioned, there's a different kind of infrastructure with actual people doing a lot of the outreach to reach communities and make health a priority. What would you say are the next steps to building the foundation that would bring a program like the kind of program that you were in charge of into the fold in the Pan-African or African landscape?
Yeah, I've kind of struggled with this because initially I thought, well, we just need to find funding to like build the infrastructure, and people will, think that it's great if we found, a group that was willing to bring electronic medical records and, set it all up. But what I'm finding as, now I'm kind of talking to more groups and meeting with, people that are on the ground that have been trying to do this work, longer than I have, that I can say in Kenya, at least, everything starts with policy. So, the policy needs to be there. So really that is the whole thing, is really setting up and building kind of the need for it here. Right now, the need just doesn't exist. That's not what the market is demanding right now, So, but as Google and Microsoft and all those groups come here, they're going to want access to that data. As the market begins to demand this level,
more information, right?
exactly, because really in the US, it's really driven by the insurance companies. And there's not really a huge penetrance of insurance here. So it's going to take either the government to really start to prioritize this information, or industry to do it. And by industry, I mean like the technology industry, which that's my bet on, because as you're seeing like Google Health develop, Amazon has an interest in health, and Africa is an emerging market. So
right,
just a matter of time before the conversation begins to shift to here around health and health data. So I think that's what's going to need to happen.
flip the switch.
Yeah. Right now, I've actually pitched Goldmine to two different VCs, and basically they're like, we're not doing healthcare because right now there is no ROI in healthcare. Fintech, agritech, edtech, mobility, but healthcare is just not, it's not lucrative enough right now.
That is so interesting because healthcare is obviously the foundation, it's the bedrock of society, right? So it kind of speaks volumes about, being here. And I mean, I want to say that I think all over Africa, we have a leadership crisis, and it really boils down to, I think if we had more women in leadership roles, we would have more of an interest in health and the health of the population to be able to increase our overall productivity, right? I don't know where there's a disconnect between if people are healthy, then your economy can be healthy, those types of things. So,
Well, you know what I think too is Africa has a young, healthy population, right? So
right.
the crisis is probably not for another 10, 15 years, So there are
Mm,
so many things that need to be dealt with, and we really saw it with COVID impacted the US the way that it did because we did not have a young healthy population,
mm,
and the benefit to Africa was that most of the population was young, healthy, and was not overweight at all, and still
mhm,
like exercised and things like that. So the reason why the US became really interested in its underserved, overweight population is because they saw how horrible it would be to have an illness that really just impacted that group.
mm,
It
mhm.
would really overwhelm the health system. So, I mean, hopefully, we will not have to wait for something like that to happen here. But the priorities around health are maternal fetal health right now, because young healthy population is having a lot of babies. Still, HIV and AIDS is getting a lot of funding still. And then,
Mhm.
the money for COVID and for emerging pandemics are still available, but chronic illness and things like that are slow burns. We'll just have to wait till the other priorities that need to be finished, are done. But I'm hopeful that we will really be able to do a leapfrog into digitization and electronic and telehealth and things like that because it has been figured out in other places. So to really be able to do maybe like a plug and play or something like that, but I don't know.
So interesting. And I want to put a pin in the business side for a moment and ask you why the where. So we're talking about Africa, we're talking about, your big move, and we discussed a little bit about how a trip that changed your life that had you moving abroad. So tell us why the where. How did you come to be living, working, and playing where you currently live?
Yeah, so, I took a trip to Tanzania in 2019 and I was so moved by just the peace that I felt, the vibrancy of the colors. I can remember just sitting on a beach and taking a picture and saying, in 2 years, this will be my view. And it took me about 2.5 years to kind of put my ducks in a row and just really quit my job and leave. And, I mentioned the colors because that was one of the things, it was actually one of the things I noticed in Ghana first, but again in Tanzania, just how rich and vibrant Black skin looks color,
Mm,
and from a place where to be professional, you're supposed to be wearing navy or black or, and I felt very muted. But
mhm,
when I saw just the beauty of the continent and how colors were celebrated, that was really one thing that just stood out to me because I think like racism is so pervasive and you don't even realize how much you're being kind of boxed in by what is the norm for the majority population because the majority color it kind of washes out the majority, whereas color for us, it really leads us in our power. Like if you've ever seen a Black person in yellow, they're basically like glowing like the sun, So for me, that was kind of one of the things. And I just really started to make a way to move to Tanzania. And I picked Tanzania initially because it was very peaceful, it was coastal, and I really just liked the culture. It was very rich, vibrant culture. And it really worked out lovely, except COVID happened like midway. So February of 2020, COVID became COVID March of 2020 and really kind of just changed up my whole thing because I had to go back to the US for a bit. And when I returned to Tanzania, I just didn't feel really the same way about it. And I was actually headed to Kampala in Uganda to just kind of check out like a new place. And unfortunately, they had detained Bobby Wine and their
Right. Their elections were going on then.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so my friends there were like, yeah, no, don't come here. Why don't you check out Nairobi? And at the time, I did not know a single soul here. So
Mm.
okay, what do I have to lose? And within 3 days of being in Nairobi, I was like, oh, this is everything. But for the first 3 days, I actually didn't like it because it's so different from Tanzania. Like in Tanzania, the people are very friendly and very welcoming, and they will let you stumble through your Swahili with a smile. In Nairobi, people, it's a lot faster. Everybody is going on their business and they do not want to hear you struggle through Swahili, especially here. Like almost everybody speaks English. So they're like, just say whatever you need to say in English and let's be done with this. But, once I kind of like rejiggered my thoughts, I realized like this is just New York. Nairobi so much of New York in terms of like everybody's got this kind of hustler spirit. The people are just so much texture. There's so much innovation. People are moving, moving, moving. You will get scammed if you are not paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
But like once you kind of once I was like, oh, Nairobi is not Dar es Salaam,
Right.
And that was like 3 days. It took me 3 days and I was like, oh, I'm here. This is it. And I was supposed to go back to Tanzania. I had a round trip ticket for a month and nope. I was like, I'm here. And luckily I had brought all my stuff because, at that point I moved in January 2021. The borders of places were still closing because of COVID. All my stuff everywhere I went. So luckily I had moved and I've been back and forth to the US, but for the past year and a half, Nairobi has been my like home base.
That's so interesting. The juxtapose of the two countries, number one, and the New York of Nairobi. And so I also want to kind of ask you about, the mindset, because it's quite courageous of you to, first of all, take the step to move first to Dar es Salaam, to Tanzania, but then to say, okay, well, I don't really know anyone in Kenya, but I'm here. So what do you think was your most prominent inspiration or reasoning for being able to just say, well, let me just do this? How did you find your footing and really kind of make your way to say this is now home?
And I will say that like it was a mindset of I when I left my job in February of 2020, I left my job with I'm going to have an experience. There are no parameters on this. Like there's no project plan. I'm not tied or wedded to the outcome. This is just where life is leading me. So when Tanzania didn't feel like it fit anymore, I knew I needed to go somewhere. And when I went to Nairobi, I also realized that my mindset had changed. Like Tanzania was perfect for just quitting my job and really needing a place to relax and just chill out and get my mind right. The energy in Nairobi, I was ready for that energy regardless. And ultimately meet people. And like now I know that in most of the countries in the world, because there are so many African Americans choosing to leave the US, most countries have a Black expat chat. Whether it's, Black people from America, Black people from Europe, Black people from all over wanting to leave and come back to Africa, there is a chat somewhere. You just have to find that. So once I found that, it was smooth sailing, like also initially some people from Tanzania were like, oh, I know this person here, take this number. So I had a couple of starter things, but my mindset, I just didn't feel any need to do it any other way than the way that felt right for me at the time. And because of that, I didn't have anxiety around not knowing anyone. I just knew this was part of the adventure.
So tell us a little bit more about that adventure. So this is where I ask you to tell us a little about your Glocal speak. So we want to hear what you hear. So I ask you to share a word, a phrase, or a saying that is a meaningful part of your local experience and why or how you came to value it as Glocal speak.
I think kind of the thing that I use now, which a lot of Kenyans say, it's English, and it's like, can you imagine? And it's really when someone kind of does something crazy, or they either say imagine or can you imagine, and like that has just come to be like my kind of life and motto of just like, can you imagine I'm doing this? Can you imagine, I say it all the time to myself, like, can you imagine? Like,
Yeah, that's so funny because I use it too, and I probably didn't use it so much until I started living here.
Yeah, I think it just really encompasses this experience, this time, and just like there's a nuance of Kenyans that are just so, I don't know, it's just so amazing, just their, I can't even describe it, but can you imagine is just my Kenyan experience. It really does.
Yeah, I mean, I love the concept of imagination and imagining because it's a bit of surprise, it's a bit of like, huh, like really, it kind of goes in a few different directions in terms of it, but the idea of like imagine, I just like it. So thank you for that. So we know when we come to Nairobi, we might hear, can you imagine?
For sure. And Nairobi is such a dynamic city. Like the infrastructure is really good. There's infrastructure for entertainment. There's infrastructure for health. The health infrastructure is really great if you're private. The tech infrastructure is huge here. I went to my first tech conference in Kenya. So it's been great.
So speaking of tech and health again, tell us about Goldmine. So how did you land on mental health, number one? Because we know that there is a definite crisis globally. And how did you evolve the team and start working on that app?
Yeah, so this has been like such a labor of love, honestly. But I had been kind of reaching out to different people in the tech space because of my initial interest in doing population health. And through that, I met a doctor who was doing a podcast just around like the tech happenings in Africa, really, called Medex Tech. Really great podcast. His name is Dr. Sam Odie. But anyway, we sat down to have a meeting, and he was telling me about his interest in mental health and really kind of getting something together to increase the access to mental health and affordable quality mental health services. So he kind of had the idea to do something around mental health. So we kind of started working together. I knew a therapist from the US who was really interested in doing this. And the three of us were the initial co-founders of Goldmine. Unfortunately, that first co-founder, wanted to focus more on building her practice. We started working with a psychiatrist here that is Kenyan. Now, she has actually taken a step back, as startups do. It's just so much front work in the beginning.
Yeah.
So now we're really looking at how we can really get this off the ground. Like, do we want to do just white label like an existing tech software? Initially, we were going to just build our own. Right now, we're doing focus groups just to make sure that people will utilize and feel comfortable utilizing virtual services for mental health. Even that the other person on the line is an actual therapist and a mental health professional, because in this space, there is a lot of distrust, just like, in the US, there's a lot of distrust around just medical professionals anyway. But when you throw in mental health and people are really divulging some of their worst things and the stigma really associated with it, will people be willing to do that? So that's where we are now. We're in the phase of really kind of making sure that this is a viable option, just
Mm-hmm.
because it has taken off in the US with, like better health and things like that. Will it work here? So that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
where we are now, where we have like taken it back to the drawing board and really making sure that gold mine is something that will be viable here.
In terms of being an entrepreneur in Kenya, what are some of the things that you've had to think about, in terms of here in Ghana, when you are an expat starting a business, if you don't have a Ghanaian partner, the cost of starting the business is 300 times the cost that it is for a local person. So what is it like to start to establish a business or register a business and operate a business as an expat in Kenya?
It's pretty difficult. And I mean, technically, we haven't really started it per se yet. So it's a little bit easier. We have a concept, but we are actually registered in Delaware, registered in Kenya, because the laws here around expats owning businesses, they get very tricky. Our co-founder, who is a psychiatrist, she was Kenyan, so she would help navigate some of that stuff. So I'm from the US. Dr. Odi is from Nigeria, but he's married to a Kenyan woman and has been here for many years. But that was one of our struggling points. We were all doctors, but really our psychiatrist counterpart was the only one that was really in that mental health community and really knew kind of all the players. So that's a big part of it too, just even building confidence and building trust amongst the practitioners and even practitioners. So yes, there is the whole thing of figuring out funding and registering your business and all of that. And those are like kind of the hard line skills, which I would say are actually easier, the hard line things that you have to kind of get through. But what's harder is really building trust, building recognition, making sure that you are doing something that people will not see as encroaching on their territory without really including them in the conversation. Because remember, there are mental services provided here. There are therapists, there are psychiatrists, there's a large mental health hospital. So there are things being done here. So for you to come as an outsider and kind of like, I have the answer, it may not be well received. So we really had to kind of get to know the community.
And it's interesting you say that because Kenya, Nairobi is kind of an NGO hub. Like there's just a lot of NGO activity in that space. So I think you're kind of speaking to that. But how have you understood and how are you navigating kind of potentially differentiating yourself from those outsiders? I mean, I think you kind of mentioned it, but how has that experience been? It's like kind of understanding and uncovering like this NGO layer that is pervasive in every place, but may not necessarily be the most or that beneficial to the missions that are purported as what they are there to do.
Yeah, I think it was very important to all three of us to make sure that our leadership representation really got to know the country and the people that were working in leadership roles that were Kenyan, because we wanted to make sure that we were not bringing a solution to Kenya based on our own beliefs. It was very important to have a Kenyan partner. It's very important to communicate with the community and see exactly what they wanted. We did not want to rebuild kind of this NGO model. We really wanted to build something that was meaningful to the community, which is why we did focus, are in the process of building focus groups with patients, therapists, leadership to really make sure that the voices are being heard. And then really just getting to know the local community of therapists. So
Mm-hmm.
when they do hear about goldmine, they're aware of it. The first knowledge of goldmine is not just going to be, an app that pops on the screen. They will have some ownership in helping to build a product that is useful.
I like that. So, speaking of useful products, you have a whole other new self as well, which is, as you mentioned, the Ungrind. So, tell us a little bit more about that wellness piece and how you came to be a content creator.
Yes. So this is something I'm really, really proud of because it is something that developed totally organically. When I left my job, I did not have words for what I was doing. I didn't have a plan for what I was doing. I just knew that I had reached a point in my life where I was no longer fulfilled. It is not that I did not like my job, it is that was no longer my calling and I could not give it my all, no matter how much money I was making and no matter how well and how many accolades I was doing. It just did not speak to me anymore. And I knew I did not want to get to the next rung. I felt that in my spirit. And that was something very new for me because, I was a doctor. I had done 2 residencies. I had a master's in public health. It was just like the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And this was the first time in my life where the next thing was about me. The next thing was about listening to my voice and hearing what I wanted. And what I wanted and what I needed was rest and to really just focus on the life that I wanted to live. It was time to look at what is the next move that I'm going to make within my career. And in this case, the career is me, really
Mm-hmm.
working on myself and my needs. And I really just took the same tools that I had used to be successful in my corporate life to begin to use them to be successful in my own life. I would literally take a notebook and just write down, like, how am I feeling today? What do I want? What is it I'm looking for? And it took me about a year and a half of really doing nothing. And I say nothing in to be very clear of like, I had no parameters around what I was doing. If I wanted to go to the forest for 5 hours and just kind of walk around and be, that's what I did. And from that, the Ungrind emerged. And I realized that I was really moving away from that grind culture. I was moving away from meaning being ascribed to the letters, on my door, the title on my door when people would come to my office. It really was more about how did I feel when I woke up in the morning? Was I feeling, nourished and re-energized and recharged and ready to move forward? Or was I feeling depleted and not wanting to do, that day? So I just began to move more towards the things that made me feel better. And that's how I came about the Ungrind, because I wanted to tell more people of how they could step out of the rat race, how they can shore up their finances, how they can shore up their mental state, their health, to make sure that they can just step away, that they realize they actually have enough and push away from the table and ungrind. For me, it actually
Mm-hmm.
leaving the US as well, because there was a lot of things that were affecting my mental health and my joy in the US that I knew I couldn't stay there and live in that environment. And that's how Africa became my home, because I found a place of peace.
So the Ungrind is a YouTube.
Yeah, the Ungrind is right now, it is a YouTube channel and an Instagram page. The YouTube channel really serves as a way to get the information out. I share just my initial story. I share how financially I set myself up. I share how, like, some of the mental questions that I had to answer. One is really like, what was I afraid of? I had set myself up to move to this next step because I had worked so hard and I had, saved some money and I do have this experience that can follow me anywhere. So what was really scaring me, so there's a video just around fear. So the YouTube channel is really to get the information out there. Instagram is really to just show pictures of my life so people can really experience it. But ultimately, I would like to have podcasts and real information, merchandising, really making some didactics around how people can step out of the rat race and live a life that they love. That's the ultimate goal.
That's inspiring. It's inspiring. It kind of leads me to my next question, which is my mindset hack. So what is your favorite or an innovative mindset hack? Now, this is one that you imagine or one that you practice or one that you know of.
So for me right now, the biggest space of peace is this place in Kenya called Karura Forest. And whether I'm happy, whether I'm sad, if I have a question, if I have something to celebrate, I actually go and just walk in the forest and forest bathe and really kind of give myself a place of peace, where there's just greenery and butterflies and monkeys and waterfalls to just sit and think about like, what am I thinking? Because when I first started this journey, I no longer trusted who I was anymore. Like I had gotten so course of who I was and what my spirit really wanted. And now, by the time I moved, when I first started this journey, it was not the move to, or quitting my job. I started the journey well before, I would say, 5, 6 years before I actually moved. And when I speak of a journey, I speak of just deconstructing myself and my new self, kind of getting uncorporatized, and I variety of ways, whether it was like sound healing or hula hooping or Dona. So I just continue that in Kenya of going to the forest, stripping down and stripping away all the other stuff and just being in nature. And my mind functions best that way and gives me the answers that I need.
That's one thing that I wish we had here. You've been here to Ghana. And what we don't have is big forests that you can roam like that. I mean, I guess we have a Brie, but it's kind of the only localish place for that. So you are blessed, to say the least.
I mean, there are a lot of green spaces, but Karura, I would say, is the equivalent of Central Park, right in the middle of Nairobi. And it was actually saved by a woman. They were supposed to develop the area and build more houses, but a woman, I forgot her name, but she didn't win the Nobel Peace Prize.
Oh, okay.
Huge protest, and she like chained herself and other women to trees. I mean, they were really coming to bulldoze this forest. I don't know what I would do without this forest. But Kenya has been very intentional about building green spaces and conserving the land that they have. So yes, I feel very fortunate because I've been to maybe like 5 other African countries and I hadn't really seen that before.
Yeah, it's truly a blessing. And I mean, I always talk about it here. I'm a tree hugger myself. And you know this, we do all the nature stuff as we can. So I love that. And I can't wait to make my way to Kenya to see that and see much more of this green world that you're living in.
Absolutely. I would love for you to be here.
Yes. So we've talked a lot of business, which has been wonderful. We know where the Ungrind is and where we can find it. Just tell our listeners really quickly where we can find your IG and your YouTube channel for the Ungrind.
Yes. So the YouTube channel is just the Ungrind. So exactly how it's spelled. You actually have to spell it out like the space Ungrind because I don't have enough viewership that it kind of does the smart logic.
Sure.
The grind always comes up. So you have to spell out the Ungrind.
Okay.
My YouTube channel and my Instagram is the underscore Ungrind.
Okay, good. All right. So we'll have that in the show notes, folks. You have very rich show notes again, as usual. So Michelle, we know you as you're the doctor now and as the wellness advocate. Tell us what you do in your spare time besides roaming the forest. So are you a reader, are you a watcher, are you a listener? And what are some of your favorite reads, watches, or listens?
I am an all, an all of the above. I would say music is what moves my soul the most. And I'm addicted to Tony Jones. I like this whole genre of music called spiritual trap, not to be trap, but it's really like a bunch of like affirmations and meditations, but with like that kind of hip hop R&B flair, so you could still kind of bump to. My favorite song by Tony Jones is a song called Yoni. Yeah, my another song by one of my favorite spiritual trappers is Vibrate Higher by Northwell. So that's like kind of my whole, vibe. And then book wise, my favorite book right now that I've read in the last year or so is Think Like a Monk.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Jay
really like
Shetty.
that. Yeah, I love Vibrate Higher by Vibrate Higher now. I forgot her name. Let me just do a quick Google search. So I love, or Vibrate Higher Daily. That's what it is. It's Vibrate Higher Daily, and her name is Layla Leah. Yeah, and then I'm not much of a watcher. I like Atlanta. That's like, but really, I really don't. I don't even turn on the TV here. If I do anything, I'll watch on my computer. But I'm not a watcher.
Sure.
There's no like shows that I make sure I watch, other than Handmaid's Tale. I watch Handmaid's Tale and I watch Atlanta. But other than that,
yeah, well, Handmaid's Tale is like watching reality TV nowadays.
Exactly. And it's so triggering. It is, I think, Handmaid's Tale is kind of like jumped the shark, but the first 2 seasons were like very triggering. Like now it's just like, it's season like 4 or 5. They're just coming up with all sorts of fanciful, storylines. First 2 seasons were like spot on of just craziness,
Right,
so.
right. I haven't watched it. Because I've kind of, I'm not so much of a watcher either. So it takes me a while to catch up on these things, but I have felt the idea of the triggering and I'm like, yeah, I'll save that for another time.
I read the book in high school and I was like, I thought like they had to have adapted it for this time for it to be so spot on. And I mean, now I think only up to episode 2 did it really stay true to the book. So now it's really just not, but they did write it, way back when to this time now, which is crazy.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it is what it is, what we're living through, but we're vibrating higher. That's what it's all about, right? Exactly. Michelle, this has been so awesome. I mean, I could talk to you obviously for hours, but we had our good time now and can continue. And I want to definitely make sure that folks check you out on your YouTube channel and on your Instagram page, and be on the lookout for just the amazing projects that you're getting yourself into. It's really inspiring and something to look forward to.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was great talking to you as always, but also you really made me think about, and when people ask you questions, you really do talk through kind of what you're experiencing. So that was great. I really appreciate it. I hope your audience checks out the Ungrind, because I do think people will really relate to the content.
Yeah, I do too. And so before we sign off, do you have any last thoughts to share with the audience for now?
Just don't let fear stop you from stepping out. If there is something on your mind, whether it's moving to another country, starting some new venture, just do it. Like, the world really needs us to live in our purpose and live in our really, bring new innovations and new voices to, age-old problems, because we are the solutions.
Yep. And that is the mic drop right there. We are the solutions. Let's be it. All right, listeners, you have been listening to another episode of Glocal Citizens. You can catch us with new episodes Tuesdays at www.glocalcitizenspod.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, Podnods. You get the idea. Just check us out. Please do write a review, recommend a guest. It helps people find good content when you write a review or give us a rating. So we appreciate that. And until next time, as always, bye for now.